startled. But the judge's hearing, unlike his eyesight, was quite acute, and those two shrieked with laughter. Often. At 28, Eliza was unmarried, a fact that had long baffled the judge. There had been an unfortunate and rather infamous misunderstanding with one Mr. Asher Dorton Cress, who the judge believed was despicable, but that had been 10 years ago. Eliza had once been demure and a politely deferential young lady, but she'd shed any pretense of deference when her heart was broken. In the last few years, she had emerged vibrant and carefree. He would think such demeanor would recommend her to gentlemen far and wide, but apparently it did not. She'd had only one suitor since her very public scandal, a gentleman some 15 years older than Eliza. Mr. Norris had faithfully called every day until one day he did not. When the judge had inquired, Eliza had said, "It was not love that compelled him, Papa. I prefer my life here with you. The work is more agreeable, and I suspect not as many hours as marriage to him would require." His youngest, Hollis, had been tragically widowed after only 2 years of a marriage without issue. While she maintained her own home, she and her delightful wit were a faithful caller to his house at least once a day without fail, and sometimes as much as 2 or 3 times per day. He should like to see her remarried, but Hollis insisted she was in no rush to do so. The judge thought she rather preferred her sister's company to that of a man. His daughters were thick as thieves, as the saying went, and were co-conspirators in something that the judge did not altogether approve of. But he was blind, and they were determined to do what they pleased, no matter what he said. So he'd given up trying to talk any practical sense into them. That questionable activity was the publication of a ladies' gazette. Tricklebank didn't think ladies needed a gazette, much less one having to do with frivolous subjects, such as fashion, gossip, and beauty. But say what he might, his daughters turned a deaf ear to him. They were unfettered in their enthusiasm for this endeavor, and if the two of them could be believed, so was all of London. The Gazette had been established by Hollis's husband, Sir Percival Honeycutt, except that Sir Percival had published an entirely different sort of gazette, obviously, one devoted to the latest political and financial news. Now that was a useful publication to the judge's way of thinking. Sir Percival's death was the most tragic of accidents, the result of his carriage sliding off the road into a swollen river during a rain, which also saw the loss of a fine pair of greys. It was a great shock to them all, and the judge had worried about Hollis and her ability to cope with such a loss. But Hollis proved herself an indomitable spirit, and she had turned her grief into efforts to preserve her husband's name. But, as she was a young woman without a man's education, and could not possibly comprehend the intricacies of politics or financial matters, she had turned the Gazette on its head, and dedicated it solely to topics that interested women, which naturally would be limited to the latest fashions and the most tantalizing on-dit swirling about London's high society. It was the judge's impression that women had very little interest in the important matters of the world. And yet, interestingly, the judge could not deny that Hollis's version of the Gazette was more actively sought than her husband's had ever been. So much so that Eliza had been pressed into the service of helping her sister prepare her Gazette each week. It was curious to Tricklebank that so many members of the quality were rather desperate to be mentioned among the Gazette's pages. Today, his daughters were in an unusually high state of excitement, for they had secured the highly sought-after invitations to the Duke of Marlborough's masquerade ball in honor of the Crown Prince of Alucia. One would think the world had stopped spinning on its axis, and that the heavens had parted, and the seas had receded, and this veritable god of all royal princes had shined his countenance upon London, and blessed them all with his presence. Hogwash! Everyone knew the prince was here to strike an important trade deal with the English government in the name of King Carl. Alucia was a small European nation with impressive wealth for her size. It was perhaps best known for an ongoing dispute with the neighboring country of Wessex.